Welcome to Living Chassidus. Together, let's live the Chassidus we learn.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Chassidus in the Morning. 15 minutes to change our lives. Good to Sichas Chelek Beis. We have moved on, starting with Pasha's Bamidbar. It's now on to Chalakim Beis and Daled, which is very interesting. Okay, so today we're basically going to discuss about the Mishkan and a special lesson for women in regards to the building of the Mishkan and where the Mishkan was built and things like this. And then in the next few days, we're going to talk about the connection between this week's Parsha and Shavuos and Matan Torah. So we get a preparation for that. So Likud Sichas Sefer Beis Pashas Bamidbar. Ois Yud Aleph. We're in the middle over here. Well, not exactly. It's a new Sicha, but it's in the middle, not from the beginning of the Sicha. Okay. So Echad Inyanim B'Pashas Bamidbar B'Naseh. One of the main topics of discussion in this week's Parsha, next week's Parsha, Hu HaMishkan Shehukam B'Midbar. It's the Mishkan that was made in the Midbar, in the desert. V'chalukas hatafkidim hakashurim b'havaras hamishkan makom makom, and the different tasks that were required for moving from place to place, how to move it, who's carrying it, and things like this. And it's all the details. Now, this shows us shigam k'shishal nimtzam Midbar. So there we go straight into it. That even when we're found in a desert, which is even in a desert, a desolate place void of Elikus, we can still bring Kedusha into that place. Mishkan, l'shchina Elikis, you take Mishkan, l'shchina Elikis, shetisha bisol, b'chol, b'chlal, b'ker, b'kol echad misol b'frat. To every single Yid in general, to the Jewish people in general, every single person, Yid specifically, that even in a place of a desert, we can make the dwelling place for God. Just like in the Midbar, from like the physical sense. Shemama, which is a desolate place, Sherim, Gemim, Aklimim, Kitanium, there's all these different type of extremes in the desert. It gets very hot in the day, it gets very cold at night. All these type of things that can damage us. So that's the physical desert. Desert not a place you want to hang out and live too long. The desert is a dangerous place. But just like that is in a physical desert, so in the spiritual desert. You have all these hashkafos, all these ideas, all these different opinions that are very extreme. And they're very damaging, as in, we don't have to look too far. We live in a time period that ideas people say it's very extreme, and what's most extreme about it is they say things. It's a new word that we learn. It's what's called gaslighting. Someone says something that is not true, but they say it as it's true. And in the beginning, you're like, doesn't make any sense. How are you saying that? And now people are saying it, and then it gets confusing. So this says this, and this thing can happen. These extremes that we find in the desert could happen in the spiritual sense, not in the desert, but could be even in a place, in a city that we live. Meaning, like there's a famous discussion that happened in I think it was in the 60s, trying to figure out how did the German people become so intense, to get to the extent to having concentration camps and looking at people as not even people anymore. And how do you get this way? And this is a lot of questions that arose. A lot of the discussion, people said when they got caught after the war, and then the answer was, we got told to do this. We're just following instructions. And this whole thing was a very in the world. It's like, how does this happen? So one of the realizations was that people by nature just follow. So they did this test. I learned it in school years ago, and you can find it online, that they take a guy. It's two tests. One I saw was that they'll take a person, and they'll sit in one room, and then in the other room was an actor. He wouldn't see it, and he got told to ask questions. So let's say you have Mr. A has to ask questions, Mr. B, and Mr. B, if Mr. B is connected to wires, and if Mr. B gets it wrong, you have to press a button that would give him electric shock, and this is sort of like a punishment for getting it wrong. And the test was to see how far a person would go. But the trick was that the person so you press a button, and then some guy on the other side of the room starts screaming like, "Oh, that hurts!" And you want to see how far we can push a person. And every time the Mr. A would get uncomfortable that what he's doing, a person in a lab coat, pretending to be a doctor, would come in and say, "Don't worry, it's fine, you can continue." And they said, like, whatever, how many people they tested it on, whatever, 20 people, maybe one person, he said, "No, this is not right, I'm not doing this." Everyone just continued. And every time they got uncomfortable, the doctor would say, "Hey, just continue." And you're doing something that's wrong. You hear someone on the other side of the room screaming. Oh, there's another one, a test they did. They put a person, like a test subject, in a room with I think two other people, and they were the actors. And they would get like a screen would pop up, and you'd have to answer the question correctly. And so one of them was like, those like lines. Which line is the biggest? And it was clearly those two smaller ones, one bigger one, A, B, or C. And so the first two people which were the actors, they would say a wrong answer. So the actual person in this test would say the right answer, whatever, it's B. And you look at them like this, like, what are you, weird? Like, can't you see? Like, it doesn't make sense. And after a few times of them making the mistake, he would start joining and saying the same wrong answer. And this is what we're talking about. Like, we don't realize we get affected by what we see and what's around us. And it affects us, like this is what Rebbe was saying. The desert is an extreme place. We live in a society today that there's extremes. And we're hearing all these extreme opinions. And we got to realize that those extreme things affect us. But together with that, so the Holy Torah teaches us, it shows us, in such a place, in a place that we're seeing, that we're getting told that men are not men and women are not women, and all these extreme ideas, and Judaism and everything that we hold dear in Yiddishkeit is sort of being told it doesn't really exist anymore, and all these crazy things. Nevertheless, if Shari, it's possible, not just it's possible, we have an obligation, livnais mikdash, to build a mikdash in this environment. And to push godliness and bring it out and express it. Baruchas Hashem, until we go to the Holy Land, blessed from Hashem. El Hagula Mitzvah Shleima, Adim Shiltenu, to the Geula through Mashiach. That was saying that even though what we learn, the message that we learn from the Mishkan was sitting there. Where was it built? Is in the desert. The desert is a place of extremes. The desert, place is a very mazikin, is damaging. It's a very hard situation, and nevertheless, we're able to build a Mishkan. And that's what this week's parasha is talking about: the Mishkan and the avodas of the Mishkan, and of carrying the Mishkan. And what we're learning, carrying it in the desert. And what we're learning is that in our life, we're being exposed to a lot of extremes. And we have to realize that we could say to ourselves that that's a dangerous situation, and we have to stay away from it. We have to run away from that and things like this. But what we're saying is, we're learning from this story in this next parsha, is that we can bring into that place, not just we can, that we must bring out godliness into that place. Yeah. Now, Yud Beis. So what is the lesson for us? Hayra Zuhi L'chol Yisrael. This is what the Rebbe says. This is a lesson for all Jewish people, but specifically l'nashei Yisrael, to the women. There says this message is for the women. Sharei Yadu, it's known. Shalabin Hamikdash Nenu Hanashim Rishonis Oil Gvarim, that in building this Hamikdash, the women were connected more than the men, before the men even. Bamidbar Ruchni, in the spiritual midbar, spiritual desert, Yesh Chugim Syam, all these issues and all these extremes. Shabehem Shiur, Toiv Avoyu, Yadus B'chlal. And in, like we were talking about before, how we're not talking about the physical desert, the spiritual desert, there's all this, it's chaos and it's chaotic. And especially in our times, we see how crazy it is. Kol shekain me'erach chayim achsidius. But specifically, if it's just not just it's crazy in general, it's crazy enough, and even more in terms of chassidus, it's like so extreme against them. Yesh lenashim has chus. Hagadela, v'hanchitzis, women have the special great merits, lehimnois bein harishonim, to be on the front lines, l'hakamas hamishkan boy loisbach, to make the dwelling place of Hashem. They're ever saying that the extreme reality that we're living and the intensity of what's going on in the spiritual desert, what we're living in, and the extremes, the ability to build a Mishkan and the obligation to bring godliness and show that the Mishkan still dwell there applies more so to women. They're more on the front lines. Specifically, Yesh Lizker Es Hanachitzus Lismasis Gam Im Atinoikis Rabim Yesem. And also because the women have the connection to tap into the children. Chikain, Kanira, Ba'ofen, Muchash, see clearly. Keshemaschilim lechanech yeled b'kivun mesuyam mishachar yaldusay, when you educate a child from the young age in a specific way, muftachim batzlacha rabba yeser, you have much more success over fartios gedalim, over peres gedalim, and big fruits, mufchaim, and beautiful fruits. Meaning. We're living in a world, and Rebbe saying, and that was back then, this was in 1957. So, around the 60s and all the craziness happening then. And we live in the same crazy time, if not worse. And Rebbe saying, even though it's a spiritual desert out there, we have the ability to transform it and to show that there's a Mishkan can be in this place. And specifically with the women, have this ability, because they're on the front lines and they interact in their own special way, and especially with being in touch with the kids, whether your own kids or being a teacher or whatever interaction you have in general, and specifically with kids, they have the ability to transform, because a kid is very impressionable. And the Rebbe says, as we see clearly, when you raise a kid in the right place, it really has a big effect. Just a story in connection with this. I read in this week's Farbrengen pamphlet, there was a chassid he learned the Timchet Tzimim in Russia, I don't remember which branch exactly. And unfortunately, he struggled when he got married, he had some kids, and he struggled to make parnasa. Really, really hard. So he would travel for months to try to figure out, try to get some parnasa. And unfortunately, communism took over, and his kids were being sent to the communist schools. And he didn't appreciate how bad what was going on. Came home and he sees his kid's situation, where they're holding and how bad it is, and it was shocking to him. And worse were his in-laws. He was trying to raise them up to learn chassidus and Torah mitzvahs, and they were like, "Listen, what are you going to put them in serious nefesh situations? They get caught. You can all be sent to Siberia. It's not worth it. Just let them get a good education. Become a doctor, a lawyer, a engineer." And he was, he didn't, as much as he didn't have any money, he was like, "No, we're not doing this. This is crazy." He ended up selling some stuff that he had, a gold watch and a few things. And he took that money and he traveled to one of the underground yeshivas, and he tried to get these kids in. And these kids were they're already in the other direction. And he tried to send them to the yeshiva, but the yeshiva was already just abandoned because the communists were after them. So he waited there for 2 weeks until he finally found out what's going on, and he finally managed to get him in. He put him in, and Baruch Hashem, the kids got inspired by the yeshiva and the learning, and in effect, it had a big effect. All like we see, which we're showing here, we're seeing here that like the kids are very impressionable, and you can have such an effect. And also we see, if you think about a lot of the mashpiyim that we got to know in Lubavitch, a lot of them. Shvei was a Rav in Crown Heights, and his brother was the Rosh Yeshiva in Montreal. You have what his name was a mashpia over here in Crown Heights. He passed away recently, and they all learned in these underground yeshivas. So we have to realize like what impact we can have as a parent, as a teacher, and even in a place where it's a desert, like it was in communist Russia, like it is unfortunately today. Even though you could say you live in Crown Heights, it's a little bit more of a bubble, but still, the desert's still seeping in. So nevertheless, we have the ability, and specific women that are in touch with kids more and have a special way of impacting people, can make a big effect. So Mitzvah Hashem, we should all realize how to bring the Mishkan into the spiritual desert, and we should have only good, and like the Rebbe says in the Sikha, that through that effort, Mashiach should come. Have a great day.